They told me not to talk about this. After the mission, after what we saw, NASA pulled us into a room and made us sign papers, pages and pages of legal threats, consequences. The kind of thing that doesn't just ruin careers, it ruins lives. But I don't care anymore, because something is happening up there, and I need someone to know the truth before it's too late. The moon isn't what you think it is. It's hollow, it's not a natural satellite. And worst of all, it's waking up. The public knows about the Apollo missions, but what they don't know is how much was hidden, how much was cut from the official reports. They'll tell you we stopped going to the moon in 1972, that Apollo 17 was the last mission. It wasn't. There was an Apollo 18, and 19, and 20. Classified, scrubbed from history, missions that weren't about exploration anymore. They were about containment. I was part of one of them. I can't say which. I can't say my real name, but I can tell you this. When I set foot on the moon, I knew right away that something was wrong. It wasn't just the silence, the vacuum, the stillness. It was the feeling, like we weren't alone. Our mission was simple. Retrieve a module left behind by a previous classified landing. NASA had lost contact with it months prior. They never told us why. We found it half buried in lunar dust, its surface scratched and dented like something had tried to get inside. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the footprints. Not ours, not human. Something else had been here first, and it had gone inside. I didn't say anything at first. Maybe I didn't want to believe it. Maybe I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, seeing patterns where there were none. But the footprints were there, clear as day. They weren't shaped like ours. They weren't even consistent. Some were long, almost reptilian, with deep claw-like impressions in the dust. Others looked disturbingly human, except for the spacing, the angle, like whoever, or whatever, made them had been moving differently. Crawling. I swallowed hard and turned to the others. Commander Walsh and Lieutenant Harris were still inspecting the damaged module. Their comms were filled with routine chatter, no hint of the unease I felt tightening around my chest. So I kept my mouth shut. For now. Walsh tapped his helmet, signaling me over. I pushed forward, the low lunar gravity making each step slow, dreamlike. When I reached them, I saw what had made him go silent. The module wasn't just damaged, it had been opened. A long, deep tear ran along its side, the edges peeled outward like something had forced its way in. The metal was warped, bent in ways that didn't make sense, like it hadn't been cut or broken but softened, pulled apart like warm plastic. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't from an impact. This wasn't normal. And then Harris muttered something that made my blood turn to ice. There's no dust inside. He was right. The moon's surface is covered in fine, powdery regolith, disturbed by anything that moves, but inside the torn module, it was clean. Something had been inside, recently, and then I noticed something else. The footprints, the ones leading into the module, there weren't any leading out. I opened my mouth to say something, then my comms filled with static. A deep, low vibration cut through the interference, something just at the edge of hearing, not a voice, not words, a sound, a pulse, like something deep beneath us had just stirred, and I swear to God. For the first time in my life, I felt the ground move, like the moon itself had just breathed. Did you feel that? I asked, my voice shaking. Neither Walsh nor Harris responded at first. They just stood there staring at the torn open module, at the strange, untouched floor inside. Maybe they were waiting for it to happen again. Maybe they were hoping it wouldn't. Then Walsh finally spoke. Seismic activity? Harris shook his head. Not possible. The moon's geologically dead. No quakes, no tectonic movement. He was right. The moon doesn't shake. It doesn't move. It doesn't breathe. And yet, I had felt it. Another burst of static crackled in my comms, louder this time, a deep pulsing sound beneath it, rhythmic and steady, like a slow heartbeat. Then, get back to the lander, now. It was Houston, ground control. But something was off. Their voices were always calm, controlled, professional. This was different, urgent, scared. "What's going on?" Walsh asked, glancing up at the sky like he could see them through his visor. A pause, more static. Then, "You are not alone." The word slammed into me like a fist. I turned in slow motion, scanning the horizon, the endless expanse of dead grey dust stretching out around us. The moon was empty, lifeless, except for the footprints, and the module that had been ripped open from the inside. Something cold slithered up my spine. We weren't alone, but that wasn't what scared me the most. What scared me was where the transmission had come from, not from Earth, from somewhere beneath us, from inside the moon. Harris staggered back. That can't be right." Another pulse hit us, deeper this time, rattling through my suit. The regolith at our feet trembled, sending ripples through the dust. And then, God help me, something answered, not in words, not in sound, but in movement. The ground cracked open, not a small fissure, not a collapse, a door. A perfect circular seam split the lunar surface a few yards away, releasing a thin, shimmering haze into the vacuum. And beneath it, metal, not rock, not ice, polished metal, smooth and dark, curving downward into something deep, something that had been buried here for a very, very long time. A staircase began to emerge, unfolding from the black void below. And as the dust settled, a shadow shifted inside. Something was coming up. I wanted to run. Every part of me was screaming to turn back, to get to the lander, to leave. But my body wouldn't move. Neither would Walsh or Harris. We just stood there, watching, as the opening in the lunar surface widened, revealing more of the impossible structure beneath. The staircase extended further, smooth and curved, descending into a darkness so deep it swallowed the light of our helmets. And then, movement. A shape, shifting just beyond the threshold. My breath hitched. "Do you see that?" Harris nodded, his hands twitching by his sides like he wanted to reach for a weapon he didn't have. Yeah, I see it." Walsh didn't respond. He was already stepping forward. I grabbed his arm. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice was flat, distant. "We were sent here to investigate anomalies." "This isn't an anomaly," I hissed. "This is a goddamn—" Before I could finish, another pulse hit us. This one was different. The first two had been deep, distant, almost like seismic waves, but this one was inside my head. A pressure, a weight pressing behind my eyes, inside my skull, like something was trying to push in. Harris groaned, clutching his helmet. "Do you hear that?" It wasn't a sound. Not really. It was more like an idea. A wordless whisper curling through my thoughts, filling the empty spaces of my mind with something foreign. It didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. Another shape moved at the bottom of the stairs. Then another. More than one. Many. A flicker of motion, too smooth, too fast. Long-limbed silhouettes shifting against the darkness, still just out of reach of our lights. Then, something changed. The whisper in my head stopped. The presence, the weight, it pulled back, just for a moment. And then a single word slid into my thoughts. Descend. My body locked up. I hadn't imagined it. It wasn't my own thought. It was theirs. Harris gasped. "It's talking to us." I turned to Walsh, my pulse hammering. "We are not going down there." But he wasn't listening anymore. His visor reflected the deep black of the opening, his body swaying slightly, as if something was pulling him toward it. And then, before I could stop him, he stepped forward and started walking down the stairs. "Walsh!" I lunged forward, grabbing his arm, but he shook me off like I wasn't even there. His movements were slow, mechanical, like he wasn't in control anymore, like he wasn't Walsh anymore. The whisper, no, the command, still echoed in my skull. Descend. A word that wasn't a word. An order that wasn't spoken. It crawled under my skin, settled into my thoughts, making me feel like I wanted to do it, like it was my choice. But it wasn't. Harris groaned beside me, pressing his hands against his helmet. "It's in my head, man. It's in my head." I knew. I could feel it too. A pull, a pressure. But Walsh, he wasn't fighting it anymore. He was already halfway down the stairs, his body weightless in the low gravity, moving without hesitation, without fear. The darkness swallowed him. "No," I muttered. "No, no, no." I turned to Harris. "We have to stop him." He didn't respond. His hands were still pressed to his helmet, his breathing ragged. "I can hear them," he whispered. "They're not speaking. They're showing me things." His voice broke. "We were never supposed to come here." I grabbed him, shaking him. "Focus! If we don't get Walsh back, we're all dead." Harris blinked hard, forcing himself to snap out of it. Then finally he nodded. We moved together, stepping onto the stairs. The second my boot hit the metal surface, another wave of something, some force, some presence, rushed through me. Not an attack, a welcome. "You were meant to return." My stomach turned. I didn't want to go any further. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run. But Walsh was still ahead of us, moving deeper into the abyss. And then, the lights in our helmets flickered. Something shifted in the darkness, and we weren't alone anymore. The darkness wasn't just darkness, it moved. Shapes slithered at the edge of our helmet lights, shifting just beyond our reach. Not fast, not hiding, just watching. Walsh had disappeared into the black. His comm was still on, but all we could hear was his breathing. Slow, steady, not panicked, not human. I gritted my teeth, gripping Harris's arm. "Stay close." He nodded, his breath ragged. "This is wrong, man. This is so wrong." He was right. But we kept moving. The stairs curved downward in a perfect spiral, deeper than should have been possible. We'd been walking for minutes, but we should have hit solid lunar bedrock by now. The moon's crust wasn't this thick. And yet, the structure continued, smoother than human engineering, seamless, alive, then movement. I froze, my flashlight flickering as something shifted just ahead. A figure stepped forward, half illuminated by my light. Walsh. He was standing in the center of the corridor, motionless. His suit was intact, his helmet still in place, but his stance was wrong. Too still. Too calm. "Walsh," I called, my voice shaking. "What the hell are you doing?" He didn't answer. Then he took a step forward, slow, deliberate, not in response to my voice, in response to something else. Then my comm crackled. Static at first, then a voice. But it wasn't Walsh, it wasn't human. "Do you see now?" The voice wasn't coming through the radio, it was inside my head. Walsh tilted his head. His visor was dark, reflective, but I knew his eyes were wrong underneath. And then the whisper came again. "You were never meant to leave." And behind him, the shadows began to move. I took a step back. So did Harris. Walsh wasn't moving anymore, just standing there, his helmet tilted slightly as if he were listening to something we couldn't hear. But I could hear it. The whisper, the presence. The thing that had curled its way into my skull, filling my thoughts with something ancient, something hungry. I flicked my eyes toward Harris. His fingers were twitching again. His breath was uneven, fogging up the inside of his visor. We gotta get out of here," he muttered. I nodded, slowly, carefully. "Walsh, we're leaving. You need to come with us." Nothing. Then he took another step forward. The motion was wrong, slow and deliberate, but also off, like he was adjusting to something, like his body was adapting. I tightened my grip on my flashlight. My other hand was clenched into a fist, shaking. The pull in my head, the whisper, the command, was getting stronger. Descend. A presence swelled in the corridor, a pressure. It wasn't just inside my head anymore. It was around us, And then I saw them. The shadows weren't just shadows. They were figures. Tall, thin, moving like liquid, their bodies stretching and shifting with the darkness. Their limbs were too long, their heads just slightly wrong. Not alien, not monsters, something older. I tried to force my feet to move, to run, to do anything. But then Walsh spoke. Or something used his voice. "We are waking." My entire body went numb. His voice wasn't his anymore. It was layered, deep and distorted, like multiple voices speaking through him at once. Harris let out a choked gasp. Jesus Christ. Walsh took another step forward and I realized. He wasn't walking, he was gliding. His feet weren't touching the ground anymore, and his visor, his faceplate, was starting to melt, not from heat, not from pressure, from something inside of it, something trying to push through. I grabbed Harris, yanking him back. "Run!" We turned and bolted up the stairs, and behind us the darkness followed. We ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just moved. My boots barely touched the steps, my body weightless in the low gravity. The tunnel ahead was twisting, bending, no, changing. The stairs weren't stairs anymore, they were closing. The metal steps were pulling into themselves, the smooth black surface folding like a living thing, cutting off our way back up. "We're trapped!" Harris gasped beside me. No, I refused to believe that. I pushed forward, heart pounding, every muscle screaming for me to stop, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. The moon wasn't supposed to do this. It wasn't supposed to be alive. Another pulse slammed through my skull. My vision blurred, my thoughts flickering, images not my own, memories that didn't belong to me, a great structure buried beneath the dust, a ship, a prison, and something inside it, something that had waited. "You woke us." The voice shattered through me like breaking glass. I nearly collapsed, my hands flying to my helmet. The pain, it wasn't physical. It was inside me, pressing against my thoughts like it was trying to squeeze into my mind. I gritted my teeth and forced myself forward. "Come on, we have to..." I turned to Harris and stopped. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing still, his body trembling, and his helmet visor. It was turning black, not cracking, not breaking, filling. Something inside was spreading, swallowing his face, twisting through the glass like liquid smoke. His breath hitched, his fingers twitched. He turned toward me, slow and unnatural. "It's inside me." His voice wasn't his anymore. It was theirs. And then the last step beneath my feet vanished, and I fell. The fall should have killed me. I tumbled downward, the weightlessness of the moon making it feel slow, dreamlike. The walls around me shifted as I plunged deeper, not metal anymore, not stone. Something else, something alive. I hit the ground hard, but the impact barely registered. The surface beneath me wasn't solid. It had give, like flesh covered in a thin metallic shell. A shudder ran through it, like it felt me land. I gagged. My hands scrambled for something to grip, but the walls pulsed under my fingers. No seams, no rivets, no escape. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic hum. Not a sound, not exactly. A vibration in my bones, in my skull. And it was coming from everywhere. I forced myself up, my helmet light flickering. The chamber I'd fallen into stretched out into the dark, curving, shifting, not built, grown, and at the center of it all, a shape, massive, suspended in the air, its surface smooth and dark, covered in veins of pulsing light. It wasn't a machine, not entirely, not anymore. It was waking up. "You see now?" The voice wasn't in my ears. It was inside my head. I clenched my teeth, trying to block it out. "Where?" My voice cracked. My throat was dry. "Where am I?" A pause. Then a whisper, curling through my mind like smoke. "Home." I staggered back, my pulse hammering. No, this isn't..." I turned, searching for Harris, for Walsh, for anyone. But I wasn't alone. Figures stood at the edge of my light, tall, still, waiting. I knew those shapes. I had seen them in the tunnel. I had seen them in the footprints. I had seen them in Walsh. One of them stepped forward, slow, deliberate. And as the light hit its face, my stomach dropped. It wasn't one of them. It was Harris. His visor was gone. His skin was pale, stretched too thin. His eyes, black and endless, filled with movement. A slow, twisted smile pulled at his lips. We never left. The hum grew louder. The walls breathed. And I realized, with gut-wrenching certainty, the moon wasn't waking up. It had never been asleep. My breath caught in my throat. Harris, or what used to be Harris, took another step forward. His movements weren't human anymore, too fluid, too precise, like he was being guided by something else. The hum around me deepened, vibrating through my bones. The pulsing veins in the walls brightened, responding to something unseen. The whole chamber reacted to Harris's presence. Or maybe it was reacting to me. I took a shaky step back, my boots pressing into the unnatural floor. "Harris," I gasped, "if you're still in there, you have to fight this. We have to—" His head tilted, a sharp, unnatural motion. Then he spoke, not with his voice, with theirs. "There is nothing to fight." The words slithered into my mind, layered, echoing, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. Harris's lips moved, but he wasn't the one speaking anymore. "You were always meant to return." A pulse shot through the air. The massive structure, the thing suspended in the middle of the chamber, shuddered. I felt it stretch, unfolding, like something inside was pushing against the surface, trying to get out. I turned to run, but the figures at the edge of the light moved. Not fast, not rushing, just closing in. My chest heaved. "This is a ship, isn't it?" I whispered. "It's not a moon. It's a ship." Harris, the thing wearing Harris, smiled. "It was a prison." The words slammed into me like a punch to the gut. I could barely think, barely breathe. Harris took another step forward. "We waited for you." The chamber groaned. The walls pulsed harder. The veins of light burned brighter, running up the suspended structure. No, not structure, cocoon. Something massive shifted inside it. Harris, they, spoke again. "And now, we leave." The cocoon split open. A wave of heat and sound slammed into me, and I fell backward. My vision blurred as something vast, impossible, began to rise. I clawed at the floor, my lungs screaming, trying to move, trying to escape. But I already knew. I was never getting out of here. The moon wasn't waking up. It was leaving, and it was taking me with it.